All right, today we're jumping into a really fiery moment in theological history. We're going to see how one of the most influential thinkers in the early church might have forged a core belief for literally millions of people. So, was a core Christian belief actually born from a disdain for sex? It's a pretty provocative question, right? And to answer it, we have to look at this one figure, Saint Jerome. He was one of the early church fathers, and he was famously passionate about celibacy. We're going to see how his own personal beliefs about virginity really became the intellectual firepower behind what would become a major doctrine, the perpetual virginity of Mary. So, to really get a handle on Jerome's arguments, you first have to kind of get inside his head. You have to understand his most fundamental conviction, which was this passionate belief in a clear spiritual hierarchy. You see, for Jerome, it was pretty simple. Not all paths to holiness were equal. He wasn't just suggesting celibacy was a nice option to have. No. No, he was arguing that virginity was an objectively superior spiritual state, a higher, faster path to heaven that absolutely surpassed marriage. And he framed this comparison in really, really stark terms. Just look at this. On one side, you've got virginity. He calls it the palm of chastity, the first fruits for God. And then on the other side, marriage. He calls that a concession to weakness, something full of worldly hindrances. Now, to be clear, for Jerome, marriage wasn't evil or anything, but it was definitely a lesser state, an accommodation for a fallen world, but absolutely not the ideal. And wow, his rhetoric was just so powerful and totally uncompromising. I mean, this quote from his work Against Jovanianus is a perfect example. He is not mincing words here. He's directly tying your choice, a celibate life versus a married life, to your ultimate place in the eternal kingdom. I mean, the stakes just could not be any higher. So, this core belief, it basically became the lens through which Jerome read all of Scripture. And it became the foundation for his defense of Mary's perpetual virginity, especially when he was up against challenges from opponents, like this guy named Helvidius. So, what exactly was the challenge? Well, it was pretty direct. The Gospels, as you might know, mentioned Jesus' brethren, his brothers, and guys like Helvidius pointed right to that and basically said, see, there's your proof. Mary and Joseph had a normal marriage and other kids after Jesus was born. But Jerome, he fired right back with this multi-pronged defense, all based on Scripture. First, he argued that the word brethren in that context, it really meant cousins. Then he pointed out that firstborn doesn't automatically mean there was a secondborn. And what about that line that Joseph knew her not till she gave birth? Well, for Jerome, that was all about God protecting her virginity before the birth, not some kind of green light for a physical relationship after. And then he had this final trump card. Scripture is totally silent on other children. And as he famously put it, we do not believe what we do not read. And this is crucial. He didn't even stop with Mary. To fully protect this whole ideal of virginity, he took it one step further. He actually claimed that Joseph also remained a virgin. His logic was that it was only fitting that from a virgin wedlock, a virgin son was born. And in doing that, he basically invents this whole new concept of a holy, celibate marriage. Okay, but his critics had an even bigger challenge for him, a much more fundamental one. And this one went all the way back to the very first pages of the Bible. The question was this: how on earth could Jerome square his ideal of celibacy with God's very first command to humanity? You know the one from the Garden of Eden, be fruitful and multiply. I mean, on the surface, it seems like a total direct contradiction, right? Well, his answer was, let's just say it was incredibly clever, and it ended up becoming profoundly influential for centuries and centuries of Christian thought. This is really where you see his genius as a debater come out. He didn't try to ignore Genesis, no way. He just recontextualized it. He argued that back in paradise, Adam and Eve were virgins. That was humanity's original, pure, ideal state. It was only after the fall, he said, that marriage and the command to be fruitful became a thing, a necessary concession to our new, mortal, fallen world. So put simply, in his view, virginity was the state of paradise. Marriage was the state of earth. So if you chose a life of virginity, it wasn't about rejecting God's creation. Not at all. It was about trying to reclaim that perfect, almost angelic state that humanity had lost in the fall. So what was the long-term impact of all these passionate, fiery arguments? Well, they didn't just win some theological debate back in the 4th century. Oh no, they went on to literally shape official church doctrine.
And you can see the progression right here on this timeline. Jerome publishes his arguments around 383 AD. Fast forward a few centuries to 649, and you have the Lateran Council formally making Mary's perpetual virginity official dogma. And then, right up to today, that very same doctrine is referenced in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So his interpretations, which were really born from this fierce personal debate, eventually became codified as official belief.
Now, it's really important to say, this wasn't just Jerome's idea all on its own. His way of arguing, his rhetoric, was uniquely fiery, and yeah, it sometimes got him into hot water. But he was part of a much bigger aesthetic movement in the early church, one that placed a huge value on continence and self-denial. You could say he was the loudest voice in the room, for sure, but he definitely wasn't the only one. When you look at it all, Jerome's work is just this powerful case study. It shows how a single, very strong perspective, when it's argued fiercely enough, can just ripple through history. It can transform what was a really contentious debate into a bedrock belief for millions of people. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do the impassioned personal arguments of one era become the accepted foundational truths of the next?